Welcome to the Global Wellness HQ family of podcasts. We are your international headquarters for resources and ideas and insight in relation to the 9 elements of holistic wellness. Join us as we interview local and international wellness experts and learn how you can implement and improve one element or dimension of wellness at a time. Our experts will share their practical tips on wellness in one of these core areas: emotional, intellectual, occupational, physical, environmental, financial, spiritual, social, or habitual. We created our family of podcasts as a resource for anyone who is looking to integrate the 9 elements of holistic wellness into their daily lives. Welcome to the show.
Awesome. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today I have my friend Christopher with me. Christopher, why don't you introduce yourself and tell my audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Christopher Turner. I am a founder of two companies. One is Emergicon and one is Emergifire, and we support fire and EMS agencies by doing their professional service billing. So what that means is we bill for patients transported by ambulance to medical insurance, Medicare and Medicaid, and then on the fire side, for big incidents that fire departments deal. It could be hazardous materials, it could be big industrial fires. We submit claims on their behalf to commercial insurers for property loss and compensation.
Wow, I love that. And by the way, this is a great conversation. We're going to cover a bit of both, but it never once occurred to me that, fire departments have these issues, but
It's
it makes sense, right?
it is, and I think the misunderstood thing a lot of times is people think, well, there's taxpayers and it pays for things, and it does. It pays for readiness and the cost of availability and all the equipment and materials and all that. It doesn't always, and actually doesn't cover the cost of actually providing either EMS or fire service. They're very costly models. So you have some limited opportunity to seek reimbursement for certain things. And so that just helps to go back and offset the cost of both services.
I love that. And again, I'm up in Canada, so I'm guessing the rules are a little bit different. But
Little
I
bit.
think, one of the things we do here, I don't know if you do this in the U.S., but when an emergency happens, they scramble both fire and ambulance,
Right.
and not always the best use of resources. But I can only imagine when you need both, that's when they should have both been there. Um, so, what kind of things would a fire department be able to claim through Emergifier?
So there's few things. One would be probably a fairly typical um, motor vehicle accident where there is fuel spills, multiple vehicles involved, maybe, and there's a lot of time and material spent getting the road back in shape, cleaning everything up. Similarly, could be 18-wheeler hazardous material fuel spills. A lot of times fire departments, by and large, I think fire departments wind up contracting out for hazardous material because they don't necessarily have the capacity there to handle certain types of hazardous materials. We've also seen, large fires, so commercial farm, someplace like that. So all kinds of things that come up where the fire department and multiple fire departments from surrounding agents, surrounding municipalities, cities, counties, what have you, will respond together. And there can be some claim, not often. There are a lot of things that aren't don't rise to the needing a claim filed. That's just part of doing business. But there are some occasions where a claim should be filed to reimburse the fire department. In part, they don't get reimbursed fully, of course.
I love that. And again, I'm guessing for smaller fire departments, the small
Big difference.
towns, it's the difference between, do we have a truck next year, or do we shut it down and hope
Yep.
that the neighboring helps out? Now, I'm going to ask a really dumb question. Feels like it's a dumb question, but maybe it's
Well,
not. Do the fire departments know that this exists, or how are you finding the reception to what you offer?
great reception. Oh, some do and some don't. I think a lot of fire departments don't, particularly when they're smaller volunteer agencies. So volunteer fire departments, no paid staff, local community members respond when the fire service is needed. And so when you don't have paid administrative staff, you probably haven't spent a lot of time thinking about that reimbursement. You rely on taxes, you rely on charitable donations and things. And so we find more and more there's some awareness of the service, but they haven't ever leveraged it before. And then there are some departments who've done it for a long, long time, and they would do it themselves in certain places. So certain cities, they would have used a city secretary or a clerk or something like that to actually file some of these claims in the past. And those would move to us just to move to the professional service, take it off of their plate, have the kind of the economy of scale of us doing a lot of it for a lot of agencies. And that way it just makes it a little bit easier and streamlines it and takes it off of somebody who maybe doesn't have expertise in it, but just has kind of had to do it over the course of time.
Had to figure it out, but didn't necessarily want to, or
Yeah,
doesn't want to try and do it again, right?
happens a lot in cities. A lot of times they have to figure stuff out. I mean, it's interesting when you're providing fire and EMS, not to mention all the municipal bonds and all those things. There's just a lot of skill sets that have to be learned within local governments.
Yeah, and it's literally down to somebody trying to figure it out. And
That's right.
I can only imagine, like, you're Googling, and it's not probably a very common search term, but more importantly, what do I even ask for?
Yeah, yeah, you're starting with nothing. So, yeah, it's interesting, and it's an opportunity, as you said, Jeff, just to provide a little bit of revenue back in, and it makes a big difference when you're talking about a smaller department that probably has, smaller incidents day to day, and then they may have something very large in their local town. Takes a lot of resources, tears up a lot of equipment. There's a loss on the fire department and the city side due to, just loss of equipment and materials and things. So it makes a big difference to try to come up with that, with some funds to replace those versus where they haven't budgeted for replacement.
I love it. Now I'm going to back up a step, because our
Shoot.
audience, they dropped in on the conversation between us. I already know a bunch about you, and I'm just fascinated. Let's step back, and first and foremost, I want to talk to you about the fact that you have two successful businesses. But first, let's talk about your journey to becoming an entrepreneur, because I'm guessing you didn't wake up one day and suddenly you had two successful companies.
Right.
Let's wind back a little. And I'm a big fan of education. So I'm going to ask you a really, really deeply personal question.
Right.
What non business books have you read to help you on this journey, and why those books?
Non-business. Interesting. So I think for a number of years now, I've read a lot of history. Um, and I've read a lot of World War I and World War II history, and then I've read a lot of ancient Rome, ancient Greece history. I wasn't a history fan in school, but as I've gotten older, I have much, much less interest in fiction and a lot more interest in reading nonfiction based on real things that have happened. And I think it's simply that there's lessons to be learned. That one lesson is history repeats itself. People are people, and the current things that are going on today have happened through time. Fortunately or unfortunately, either one. And then the second thing is, if I can remember my train of thought here, is that there are lessons to be learned in terms of not over analyzing or responding, or simply not being not grateful. So when you think about where we are in history and you look at the past, it's a really good center for you to say, wait a second, the thing that I'm worried about right now pales in comparison to things that I would have worried about in the past. And I think that's a real human tendency, is to bemoan the minor inconvenience we have now as if it's the end of the world. When you go back in history, I'm like, oh my Lord, you know what? I mean, that they would have only prayed for something this fantastic. And so I think that's kind of a centering effect as well. If you've read about people who were in concentration camps in World War II, your issues today don't even come close. Don't even come close. And so for myself, I tend to find it's been important throughout my life to anchor myself so I don't get too far afield in any one respect of where I think I should be in terms of, humility and gratitude and things like that.
I love that perspective, and I think a lot of people think, oh, if you're in business, you should read business books. But one of my favorite books of all time is The Art of War,
Yeah.
and not for the reasons a lot of people think I like it. I'm a pacifist, and one of the messages I like is, if you go into war, you lose. Whether
Sure.
you're the victor or the loser, you still
Yep.
lose. The real win is if you can avoid war in the first place.
It's funny that you say that, because I just mentioned, and it felt a little bit strange to mention it to, I was on a call with our management team, and I mentioned one of the books that I've read, I found fairly influential, was The Guns of August, which is the month before World War One started. And essentially, most of the leaders in the world knew it was avoidable, but so much had already been put into action that they just felt like they had to proceed. And so I shared with the managers that the quote from the book, which I can't recall right off, but it's about basically the impetus of action, and the plans so often are hard to undo, even when you realize that it's a mistake. And so I mentioned it to them in reference, and I said it's a little bit of a strange reference, but it's important. It's kind of that we do this is the way we've always done it, or business as usual. Just because lots of time and effort and energy is put into it doesn't mean it's the right thing. So I
Hmm.
remember in school learning the concept of ignore sunk cost, which it doesn't matter what you've spent. If it's no longer valuable, don't spend any more. You don't keep going because you already spent a ton of money on something.
Yeah. By the way, I study cognitive biases because why not? And sunk cost fallacy is one of them. But we've gone this far down the road. We got to keep going. No, sometimes you just say, let's go back home because this trip is not worth the effort.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
love it. So let's step back. And I love sharing origin stories. My people are visionaries. Christopher and I are almost Colby A twins. We are quick starts, and we were introduced by somebody who introduced me to that concept. So thank you to Justin Breen for bringing us together. How did Christopher become an entrepreneur, or have you always just been one? And these last two companies were the latest and greatest hits.
I haven't always been one. I think I always had a sense as I came out of college and graduate school that I never liked working for anybody else. And I hate to say that, but it's the truth. And I never found that a lot of the time spent at work was valuable. So I was always extremely fast to do the things that I needed to be done. And then I felt like I spent a lot of other time holding, the clock to show I legitimately, earned my position, type of thing. And so I
Yeah.
always had a sense that this is not going to be something I do forever. And as I saw a real gap in the market, with the quick start, I move first and kind of think second, which is good and bad at times, but you have to have some real risk tolerance to just go for it. And I have that, fortunately. And so it was the culmination of those things, which is I kind of knew the path that I was on. I knew I was looking for a larger future. I didn't really see that, in being an employee other places. But, I wasn't all that old. I started my first company when I was 35. But yeah, so it was a culmination of factors, but I wasn't like some of the entrepreneurs that I know and meet who were an entrepreneur at 8 years old, and they just grew it and grew it, just kept hammering away at everything. So I'm sure I have other experiences, but not quite like that.
I love it. And I think it's just one of those things that, we find the path we need to take that gets us to where we are.
Right.
Um, so how long have you been running the two companies? And I love the fact that you've got a management person on each, because I think that's one of the quick start challenges is, we quick start and then it's like, for me, once I've whiteboarded something, as far as I'm concerned, it's done.
Right.
And as far as the rest of the world, they're like, Where's the physical tangible thing?" So
Yeah, the vision for us is the easy part to come up with. That's the make it up part. And to use strategic coach language, you can make it up. You need people to make it real and then make it recur. That becomes the challenge. So Emergicon I started in 2006, and then Emergifire I started in 2019. And they both now operate largely without need of my day-to-day involvement. So I tend to give historical context, kind of industry insight. I have a really good sense, of course, for what's going on and picking up parts and pieces. And then I continue to work on myself as a visionary and how do I set vision for the future of where we're going to go. And that comes very easily to me. And so I'm very fortunate to work with leadership for both companies that allow me to share that with them. And then it's a balance, and I'm sure lots of people recognize this. It's a balance of how fast can we get where I see we need to go versus the reality of what we're capable of right now. And that's not a negative. It's just you're bringing people along with you, and they're really the people who make it successful at work. And so you have to go at the speed that they can go, or you're going to blow it up.
love that. Now, what advice would you have? Because I've experimented my life away. I've been the high risk tolerant person, and I've jumped out of many an airplane without first building a parachute.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to a young visionary to help them make the most out of their visionary journey? Because I think this podcast episode is going to be about quick starters, and it's not always smooth sailing. Sometimes we splat. Is that fair?
It is. It is. Um, Probably a few things. One, it was very clear to me, and let me think back time wise, it was probably 2016 or so, something like that, that I realized I had to figure out how to become a CEO, which I'd never been before, even though I was in name for about 8 years at that point. But you have to decide, the CEO is just a title, and you may or may not be a CEO. And I really don't think I am, even though I've got the title. But the advice I would give is that as a visionary, when you're bringing that skill set forward, you've got to do a few things. One is you've got to have a structure and a model that the company can operate on. So we use the entrepreneurial operating system. So it's the operating model that we leverage. There's others out there, but using the model gives you a core of components to rely on so that it's not just every day making up new and everybody trying to keep up with you. And then two, you've got to lean into coaching yourself. So I use strategic coach. And the part of the coaching, and there's lots of coaches out there who do a lot of wonderful work, is you are convinced and know what you know to be right and true, or at least have a really strong sense it's going to work. You've got to get that into a tangible way that people can deliver on it. So one of the reasons that the last few years have been so successful for us is the integrator that was promoted in place, who hadn't been with us all that long, is a lady named Tiffany Pearson. And she taught me the concept, and is very big on this, of don't have unspoken expectations. That's hard as a visionary, because as visionaries, we tend to think this is going to be wonderful and beautiful. Do it. You should be great. So Jeff, you should be good with this. Go, 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 go. The problem is that leads a lot of opening for unspoken expectations. And I've been really guilty of this. As you come back and I'm like, kind of wish you'd done this a little better or thought about this a little bit more. Well, then just say it. And that's not always easy. So the point of of leaning into some coaching and an operating model is get it out as structured as you possibly can. Rely on those, though, the others out there in coaching and all that can help you, that says you can't give a visionary type idea to people and expect them to execute it without some very specific parameters. So strategic coach leans very heavily on the thinking tools Dan Sullivan creates. Those are invaluable in my opinion because it forces you to put into writing something somebody can actually run with. So then the passion and energy comes from you as the visionary to say, this is why it's going to work, this is why it's going to be great. And they get all that, but you got to have the blueprint and the stuff that they know this has to be done. It's okay if this doesn't get done. It's not a critical component.
I love it. And I'm just going to point out that Traction is one of my favorite books of all time,
Yeah. Yeah.
as is
Rocket fuel.
Rocket Fuel, but anything Dan Sullivan, Benjamin Hardy. I
Oh
mean,
yeah. 10X and Gap
the
in the Game.
Who Not How just
Who Not How.
broke my brain in the most amazing way. And I've actually developed an AI model of my own. Again, I could do it manually, but where's the fun in that?
Right.
I've created an AI model that helps me as a visionary, and I'm going to share this with you, Christopher, because it was an eye opener for me. I've learned that there's at least four levels of people in business. So there's the visionaries up here who, we whiteboard it, we're done, and then there's the strategic management level where they kind of come up with, here's the plan, and then you've got the line management where their job is to sort of set some expectations and
Yep.
start creating systems and processes. And then there's the boots on the ground people who do things. So two things I'll share with you just for fun. I created a translator app in OpenGPT, and basically it takes visionary and turns it into boots on the ground speak.
That's
And
cool.
it does it one level at a time. So you and I will talk about that another time maybe I'll do a teaching on it because it was fascinating to me because again, once I've whiteboarded it, it's done. And then it's like, wait, nobody's paying me for my whiteboard. I've got to, turn it into something. The other little thing I did recently is I figured out how to turn um, the impact filter, the Who finder from Dan Sullivan. I've turned that into an AI, so it asks me a lot of questions to help me find the right Who because. Like you, I'm a smart guy and I can figure things out. So how is super easy for me. It's just at some point you get burnt out and it's like, oops, should have went with who. So
Yeah. The
so
who
I
makes
love that you're in both of those groups. I think that's one of the lessons I want to pull out is life's a journey and it's more fun when you travel along with other people.
absolutely. And you've got to, you've got to be helpful. It has to be people that you can help each other along. Um, and there's not a lot of there's a lot of places to get coaching, and then there's not because it really depends on what you get out of it, I suppose. So that I think in some respect, I've had some experience with some coaches. I thought, this has been nice conversation, and they're not wrong, but I need something I can really leverage and use, like what you're talking about, Jeff, which is how do you get it to the people who actually have to do it? Because they're the ones who are going to know if it's going to work or not, or there needs to be tweaks or whatever that is.
Yeah, I love that. So I think that's one of the things I would say, and I want your feedback on this because on the outside, I've read everything Dan Kennedy has written that I can find. I really feel like the next evolution in my journey is to join Strategic Coach because I really feel like he focuses on visionaries. Is that a fair statement?
100%.
Or am I just reading what I want to read
No,
because
no, 100%. They're solely focused on working with entrepreneurs with pretty strict criteria for working with them, and they've got their levels so that you can enter at the appropriate level and then advance and all that. But it is all visionaries. It is everybody running into no matter what the business is, not even the same problems. It's just the growth of you as an individual. So when it was first introduced to me, it said this is EOS is for operating your company and strategic coaches for you as an entrepreneur. And I thought, I don't know what that means. Well, once I joined, I got it because
Yeah.
it is about you as a person, as an individual, and the growth you want to have in life, both personally and professionally. And that's really important because you are one person. You're not a different person, you know. And for us in the seats that we're in, you never really leave that visionary piece. It's not like you stop having vision in your personal life, it's only in your work life. It doesn't work like that. You see opportunities for evolution in the world around you. Um, it's funny. It's not something generally comes up, but I'm sure Jeff, you're like this as well, which is you're probably a great critic of the world around you because you see things that are, you know, more difficult than they need to be. Easy, it could be much easier dealt with. There's added bureaucracy where there doesn't need to be bureaucracy, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I feel I'm the fine finishing person. You know, I want to take sandpaper to the world and rub off all the rough edges.
Yep.
And I think that's, you know, a lot of people, wow, you're pretty critical. And I'm like, no, I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying, you know, if I'm waiting in a line for 5 minutes, I can tell you what's wrong with the line.
Yeah. No, I think it, yeah, that I don't see that as critical at all because I think given the opportunity to make a change, it'd be a positive change. You know, I think criticism comes in when there's criticism and you have nothing to offer. So yeah, I think that it's, you know, you can imagine why are painters that are masters. They're good painters certainly, but it's that key difference in bringing whatever the subject is to life that really is the last little piece.
I love that. And I think, you know, it fascinates me. You look at the great painters that, you know, we recognize as masters, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo. Um, and I know reading one of Dan's books, if not all of them, I think it was 10x is easier than 2x.
Right.
It really made me go back and revisit Michelangelo because, you know, he was the master of, you know, he didn't say, you know, I sculpted David. He just said, I removed the pieces of the rock that weren't David. And I love the simplicity of that. But then I also went and looked, and, you know, we couldn't and probably shouldn't do this today. Both Michelangelo and Da Vinci, they went and conducted unauthorized autopsies, and you know they learned how the sinew and the tissue and the muscles all interacted, just so they could paint or sculpt a realistic face.
Yeah.
You know, and I think David was the culmination of years of work. He had
Yes.
this one special piece of, I don't remember the, I'm going to say marble or whatever it was, but he had it for years and he was just waiting for the right thing to sculpt with it. And,
Yeah, that's my recollection too.
you know, I don't need to know the details, but it was just fascinating to me. And I think that's, you know, as a younger person, I got called a daydreamer because I just sit there and stare at something completely innocuous or uninteresting. And I'd be like, that could be something else. And
The
between you
daydreamer.
and me, I also like taking things apart. Didn't care to put them back together. So you can guess how that went over with
Oh
parents.
yeah. Yeah, your two on your Colby is the same as my two. So yeah, I can disassemble something just fine. It's never going back together though.
My first car, after I sold it, I found a box of spare parts, and I'm like, I bet you these were important to something. Some engineer thought they needed it, but the car's fine.
Yep, yep, it still runs. There's obviously excess stuff.
Yeah, in all fairness, I gave the box to the new owner and they threw it out. So, you know, it's
Yep.
clearly my conscience was clear. So,
I'm familiar with the concept.
and you know, it's credit to Justin. You know, I didn't know that I was a visionary. I just thought I was really bad at execution because, like you said, I take things apart, don't want to put it back together. It's like, no, 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 that's not my job.
No. No, the creating the future and creating the opportunity is really the difference. And it's interesting, um, as you work with other people, it's common and not that common. So I remember when I started my first company and I'd have people tell me all the time, "Oh, I always wanted to do something like that, start a company, work for myself, whatever." And I always kind of, whatever. But in reality, my brain was always was, then do it.
Yeah.
Okay, then do it. I mean, there's not in the United States, and I'm sure Canada's the same way, you can do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
You pay a small fee and file and all that. That's not that hard. It's the what is it you're trying to accomplish? And to give another hint to anybody out there that's interested, service makes all the difference in the world. So it doesn't matter if you're installing plumbing or writing code or whatever, service is a market differentiator. And so if you can always be putting yourself in the position of thinking about the people who you want to buy your product and what you would want is them, that's a big difference because that gets really hard to scale.
Now, I want to go deeper on that because I whiteboard excellent service, and then when I hand it to my team, it feels like it's, kind of a Frankenstein approach, and it's like, no,
Right.
no, no, that's not. I wasn't sculpting Frankenstein. I was sculpting something else. What advice do you have for people who are looking at customer service? Because I know this is an important topic for you. What are some of the things people should be implementing or considering when they're making that service shift? Because I'd rather serve existing customers and
Yeah.
have them come back than go hunting for new ones. Is that?
Yeah, that's the right answer. And I'll give advice that's going to be bad because I don't think we do this enough either is, but you need to really audit yourself as if you were not knowledgeable or involved or whatever, or get somebody else to do it because whatever your customer experiences is their reality. So if you have a call center, if you've got anything, you need to have people looking at it that can give input back in that says, this was terrible. So I had to make a phone call to AT&T Business yesterday, and one of the things that struck me was their phone lines constantly are popping and crackling. And I think you are a phone company,
Yeah,
and that's a
irony.
massive company, and I'm sure it's not something they can easily change, whatever. But it was surprising to me, the hold and everything. I thought this is the worst call quality line I've had in a long time. And I had to call two different numbers and both of them the exact same way. I think both were, but I don't think it was a me thing was the point. But
Yeah.
you've got to, look at it, kind of audit yourself from the outside and see if you're delivering on the service that you want to deliver on, whatever level that is. I think that's really important.
I love that, and I think honestly, that's the easiest thing any one of us could do is when you meet a new customer, pull them aside and say, "Oh, by the way, I'd like your feedback," and ask them what the steps are. I have a company. I'm not kidding. They're taking all of their medical facility and they're doing all their booking online. Well, minor problem, their online site neither remembers or shares details of your booking.
Wow.
So, after I watched it spin around for a few times and it timed me out 3 times, I finally called the company and by that point I'm still patient, but I'm a little annoyed. And they're like, "Oh, our website hasn't worked for years." And I'm like, "So why do you have this big blue book now button?"
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, we don't know how to take that down." I'm like, "Wow."
And it's funny that goes back to the Who Not How book from Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy, which is there is a who for those things. It doesn't have to be you.
Yeah.
You then just have to lean into, we need this to do this better. And somebody will tell you this is what it'll take and the price and all that stuff. You don't have to create everything out of whole cloth. There's all kinds of amazing things out there. And I think a lot of times that is a struggle as you think I have to hire the person, I've got to manage the person, I have to do this and that. Not necessarily. You can get a vendor who's selling you that and you partner together in this beautiful way where you don't have to fool with it. They get paid or they don't get paid based on performance or commitments or whatever.
Well, and the funny in this case, I actually have a friend who does that sort of thing. And he said, "Oh, yeah, that's a common problem with this whatever setup." Like he looked at it and said, "I can fix it in 5 minutes." And they said, "Well, we've got a long-standing relationship with our existing partner." And I'm like, "But they're not delivering the one thing they're supposed to deliver." Going back to sunk cost fallacy, or the whole bias thing. Now, Christopher, I could talk to you all day, and you and I have had other conversations that went a little longer. I do want to promise to return you to your day.
Sure.
You're the expert at being you, and I'm just starting to enter this world of visionaries. What advice or what questions should I ask you that I haven't yet?
Um, I think I think in order to really be successful and have what it is you probably have in your mind that you're putting time and effort into, whatever it is your industry is, and I'm speaking generally, you've got to get out of your own way. So you can come up with the ideas as a visionary. Entrepreneurs tend to be really good at selling what they did because they have to, even if they never sold before, like I did, but and you're convinced this is right. And then everybody looks to you for the answers because you've created it, but you've got to start to actively move out of the stuff you don't know. And you've got to start retreating back to, I still have vision, I still have a pathway, I still see a million ways for us to improve if you have that critical eye. But we're at a point now where other people are contributing and I can only be in my seat. So the EOS model, entrepreneurial operating system model, they talk about visionary integrator, and the visionary is the make it up person. The integrator is the person who brings it all together. I would want to be an integrator. Sounds terrible, but those that are really good at it, they're wrangling both the visionary and they're wrangling all the aspects under the integrator. So there's a real line of delineation there. So the visionary has to, or best practice is to really stay in your box, not interfere, not jump into everything, because you're not going to be the best person to do that. So that's hard. It's really hard, and it's hard for um, particularly when the company's been around for a while and people have been there from very early days with you. They think you own it, you started it, you make the decisions, you give all the answers. And that's not really true. You get to a point where you don't make the decisions anymore, you don't have the answers, and you're not the best person to go to. So that's hard. So it's hard, and it requires people in the organization to realize that as well. And I've been very fortunate and blessed that we've had employees that we've had for a long time, and we've grown and grown and lots of new ones. But those older employees are valuable because they have a lot of knowledge and history and they can give great perspective. But they also have had to go through a transition in the relationship where maybe you don't work together anymore, and they are not doing the things the way that we always did before.
I love that. And, a friend of mine, he's a professional CEO and he is definitely the integrator. And what I loved about him was he made a point of, that it was a big company. I think they had 800 employees under his care. He ate lunch in the corporate dining room every day, and he always sat at a big open table, and everybody was encouraged to come and share what they're working on with him. And it was funny because one day I came in and he was alone and I was alone, and I'm like, "I don't want to bother you," and he's like, "Jeff, that's why I'm here."
Right.
He's like, "Come and let's talk." And I love that open leadership style. But I will also point out there's boundaries. And, for him, it was fact gathering and figuring out, his job as he saw it was he looked for rough edges and how do we smooth it. And I loved his approach that every one of our coworkers had to be treated like our best client.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it was such a collaborative space. And I have to say I was sad when it was time for me to move on because they had whiteboards everywhere. And it was just
Cool.
you know every space in the building was designed for impromptu meetings. And now I feel like I got this at Attraction, so I'm going to ask you. This is a totally tangent question,
Sure.
but I believe I learned about Walt and Roy Disney through Traction. Does that ring a bell?
It doesn't, but it's been a long time since I've read it.
I feel like they were the perfect example, and I'm just going to share that
Oh, you
Walt
know
was
what? That
the
may be from
visionary.
Traction. That may be
It feels like a Traction sort of book
right.
because Walt was the visionary and Roy was the integrator. And, if Roy was by himself, he'd have a very well run, impoverished business.
Yeah.
If Walt was by himself, he'd be a crazy guy drawing cartoons. Like,
Yep.
you put the two of them together. And I think as a visionary, I'm just going to say that I believe one of my first who's is always the integrator.
Yes. And
Because
that's very difficult. Hard to get right. I've gone through a lot myself. And then um, if you're growing, and hopefully you are, can they continue to grow along with you? Is the integrator of today the one that you need 5 years from now? And maybe yes, maybe no.
I love that. Well, Christopher, I could talk to you all day, but I do want to thank you for hanging out with me and sharing your vision of visionaries. I think it's an amazingly fascinating topic. I didn't know we existed. I just thought I was the ugly duckling. I was like always going, "Oh, I hate doing this stuff." Like when I read the role of the integrator, I was like, "No, thank you."
Yeah. And
So
it's and you should join Strategic Coach. It's a great place to be with other visionaries. You'll find that you've got a lot to offer, and you'll never be in a group of people that you're more aligned with. I mean, it's really nice.
I love it. Well, I've met a handful of people who were in Strategic Coach, and we got along right off the bat. I didn't know they were in at the time, but it's definitely on my 2024 action plan is to join the family that I didn't know existed. So,
Cool.
well, thank you for hanging out with me,
Yeah.
Christopher. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to sharing you with my audience.
All right. Thanks a lot. Talk to you later.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our show. We hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to either click the link below or scan the QR code to register and listen to other episodes of our podcast. Or if you think your business or you would be a great guest to be on our show, we're always looking for experts in one of the 9 elements of holistic wellness. We'd love to have you. You can either click the link below or you can scan the QR code and complete our speaker intake form. Thank you, and to your wellness.